Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open up this commission meeting. We've waited a few moments here to see if others are going to arrive. This is the commission to study the cost of special education. We've met a number of times, and we are now meeting today. We do have an agenda, and before I do that, I want to just introduce everybody to everybody else here in case you don't know whom we are. I'm Rick Ladd. in the House, and I think everybody's familiar with myself, so I'm not going to come from Haverhill. Been a past school administrator and teacher, and very, very much involved with education, K through 12, and higher education as well, as a trustee with the university system. I'll start with Tim right over there. Could you introduce yourself? This is the first time you've been here at the meeting. Your name?
Sure.
What you're representing?
Sure. I'm Tim Lenahan. I am the interim director of the Office of the Advocate for Special Ed. And by way of background, I've got a lot of experience with DHHS after graduating from law school, and was part of what led me to do this was I was a identified child a long time ago, given the gray in my hair, and had an advocate in the state of Rhode Island, and obviously went on to successful. But we are looking at problems. I replaced Kristen Monteramini, who's doing other things now.
Thank you.
I am Becky Fredette. I'm the State Director of Special Education.
Good morning, I'm Becky Wilson. I'm the Director of Governmental Relations for the New Hampshire School Boards Association. However, on this commission, I'm serving as a public member. Prior to serving in the role I'm in now, which I've been in for about 6 years, I was a special education director here in the state for about 20 years.
Thank you. You know, you have the two Beckys sitting beside each other, and you're just going to confuse me up here, but that's okay. Go ahead.
I'm Dr. Jennifer Dolliff. I'm a special ed administrator. Currently, I've been a director throughout the state for 30 plus years. I've had a child with an IEP as well, and I represent NHA SEA.
I'm Dwayne Ford, the business administrator for SAU 67 in Bow and Dunbarton, and was appointed by the Commissioner of Education.
Representative Megan Murray. I represent Amherst and Milford. I'm also the clerk, and I'm happy to be here. Nice to meet you, Tim. For the record, how do I spell your last name?
Lenihan.
Thank you.
And I'm Dick Ames. I'm a representative from Jaffrey and also representing Dublin. And I'm a member of the School Funding Committee. And before that was for many years a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. So I think that there's a lot more, but I'm going to stop there.
You're also vice chair of this commission. Tack that on.
Representative Margaret Dry. I live in Plainfield, and I represent Plainfield, Cornish, Newport, Unity, and Charlestown, and I'm on the Education Policy and Administration Committee.
What I'm going to do also today, I'm going to hand a piece of paper out to everybody. Would you please put down your telephone number and an email so that we know how to text you or get a hold of you. I'd like to just go over quickly while making sure, do we have a quorum, Madam Clerk?
I believe so, yes, with Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So then we can go ahead then and we have a number of sheets which we have up here. We've handed out to members on the committee, and I think there should be enough too for those here that are in front of us. I'll go through, and we have, of course, the agenda. Does everybody have a sheet that says agenda on it like this?
Yes.
I didn't get mine.
Okay, and then we have the minutes of the previous October 29 meeting, which we will go and look at here in a few moments. So we have the minutes. Do you all have a copy of the minutes? There's also a sheet which has been passed out here, which will be presented and gone over by the Children's Scholarship Fund. This is from Matt Southerton.
What is that?
That came late.
It says commission questions related to the EFA and differentiated aid.
Oh, I got that, yeah.
Okay. Also associated with that, let's see. There was a sheet, I don't even know if I have it in front of me.
That's extra.
Yeah, there was a sheet that also had on it, it said at the top, chapter, Education Administrative Rule 800. And it had some other of the rules associated with the EFA program, because we will be talking about costing of that program today.
Some extra too.
Yes, I'll go make some copies. Yes, everything that is here you'll need.
This is it.
And then we also have a sheet that's, it says on top of it,
Extra.
draft New Hampshire. It's a table.
No, that one.
That one.
Yeah. It's all informational stuff.
I just don't think we have quite enough copies. I'll go make.
And there's another one which is colorful.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's all the paperwork that we have in front of us here. And we'll wade through it. The agenda is quite lengthy, but I hope we can get through it. And towards the latter part, then I really want to sit down as a group here. And when I was a school principal, then an administrator, we had what we called STP. It's not the stuff you put in your car engine. It means situation. Where are we right now? T for target. Where do we want to go? What's the end result? And P is the process for getting there to that. So we need to be looking at that and finding out from everybody here, what do you see this committee trying to really achieve here? After all our work, we have a mandate that's in Senate Bill 57, yes. But we have an end result, which we got to make some recommendations and findings on, and we have till, well, the July 1, 2026 to do that. And this is a topic that we can get bogged down in a whole lot of stuff. It's a very complex topic dealing with IDEA, the costing formula we have here, getting into the area of HHS and Medicaid to schools. There's so much to it. So we've got to really start focusing and trying to get out of the swamp and get into how we going to get some answers here. So with that, I'd like to go right down through the agenda here. The next item we have here is approval of the minutes from October 29th. Take a second, look them over. We're very fortunate to have a clerk that is keeping minutes for us. And so let's not get upset. There's T's not crossed or I's not dotted, or if there's a wrong tense of the verb or subject and predicate don't match up. You know, let's be kind. Yeah, in our minutes, all we really have to do is summarize what we're doing. We don't have to get everything verbatim, but we have a clerk that's very active and engaged, and I thank her for it. Is there a motion then?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
Okay, we have a motion made by Rebecca Wilson and second by Representative Dry here,
Second.
or Dick Ames, either one. Any further discussion on these? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you very much.
Are there any extensions for anyone who wasn't here? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay. Okay.
2 extensions.
All right. Now, the information handouts for discussion, and of course, there've been some more added to that. We'll be coming back to these things. So those are some of the items which have been handed out. So I'd like to get right now down to, if you recall from our last meeting, we were looking at some of the costs associated with students which are attending the scholarship program, the EFAs. And differentiated aid is specifically where we had some concerns, not concerns, but questions. You know, what type of dollar are we spending? How many kids are getting this? What's the process for identifying all that? So we have today Matt Southerton from the scholarship organization, which is here. And so Matt, would you like to come forward to the table right there where we can go through this? I've also handed out there the rules associated with the EFA program and some of the information that by rule at the end, talking about a qualified examiner, dealing with the definition of what we don't call it. I'm looking through this thing. Disabling condition. So with that, Matt, welcome. And I sent to you some of the questions that I sort of summarized some of our notes. And would you please just go ahead and explain how you address a student that has a disabling type condition? You don't just explain how you're dealing with this differentiated aid.
Sure. So, good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Matt Southerton, Director of Policy and Compliance for the Children's Scholarship Fund. So, with the expansion of the EFA law, we actually have two conditions that we deal with now. Previously, we didn't separate the priority groups with the disabling condition group. Now with the expansion of the law, we have to separate those into students that receive an evaluation from a private school or from a school district and may have an IEP, and ones that use our MCD process, right? So
MCD stands for what?
Medical Certification of Disability.
Okay.
So in the administrative rules at 18 was created a process where a student can receive the differentiated aid for students with special needs in RSA 198-40. And under that condition, a student can be qualified by a medical professional, and they can certify them for that disability, and they can present that evidence to us through our MCD form, and then they can receive that differentiated aid. Yeah, please.
Can you just tell us more about who you work for and what your role is? And do you work for the state or do you work for?
So CSF is contracted by the state of New Hampshire, a state-approved contract, to administer the EFA program.
It's a private organization?
It's a nonprofit
Private?
charity,
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, so I think that you've all seen that New Hampshire Education Fact Sheet. I think that does probably the best job of explaining disabling condition and how the state arrived at that definition to be able to award funds to these students who are not on an IEP. I believe that was shared with the committee at your last meeting.
So the process is simply that a medical person has to say they have a disability, correct?
So what they would do, you have two pathways. You can either, so when we assess that student when we verify if they have a disability, we would accept the material from a public school district, their evaluation, or if the student's on the IEP, the evaluations that says they qualify for that aid. Or we would accept the determination by a medical professional licensed to practice in any state. And you can see that in our policy, qualifying for differentiated aid policy STU 16, and that's online.
So Matt, the definition that we see within rule.
At 800.
802.01, it's been passed out. And it says on the second page there, pupil with a disabling condition means a child having, and it lists the IEP categories: autism, deafblindness, deafness, developmental delayed, emotional disturbance, hearing impaired, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other, I guess it's hearing impaired, specific learning disability, speech language impairment, traumatic brain injury, TBI, and acquired brain injury or visual impairment or blindness. So you're talking about those very specific 13 IEP categories. And this may be, I didn't count all these up right here, whether that's 13 or not. But so then you have these very specific areas which have to be identified by the medical side, correct?
Correct.
Can I, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Are you also, though, in the rules, there's an area where it addresses in 1107.04, that's in the latter part of the pack that the folks have here. It talks about qualified examiners and what type of assessment is required and who's qualified to identify those specific categories.
Right. So a qualified examiner, the context of the qualified examiner is in reference to the school district. So let me say from the outset, I'm not an expert in special education. You would probably want to speak with someone from the department rather than myself. The qualified examiner context is in relation to the school district. That's my understanding, right? So when you say what are the certifications, what do they need? You would let me just list who the qualified examiners could be, and that's differentiated on what type of disability. So for autism, we have associate school psychologist, certified educator, guidance counselor, psychologist, and a school psychologist. So you would say, what are the certifications or requirements that they need to meet in able to assess those students' academic performance for autism? That's my understanding.
I just have a follow-up.
Okay.
Okay, let me do this one follow-up then. When within ED 804, where it says EFA funds and disbursement, it says a pupil shall be eligible for a differentiated aid amount set forth in RSA 19840A2 size parentheses D. That's the one that says all that here's the base cost, here are the three areas differentiated, all the above equate to providing an adequate education.
Right.
The sum total. Then under RSA 194F, or yeah, if there has been a determination of eligibility for special education by a qualified examiner for each assessment, as defined and enumerated in 1107.04. So this is referencing by administrative rule the way we identify and disperse funds for the EFA program, and they're referencing these specific categories. So my question is, because then I'm going to get into some of the costing stuff. Mm-hmm. If in fact we're referencing how these categories are set up in this table in 1107.04, then it lists all these different ways for all these different categories.
Right.
Are you following? Does your organization follow this table?
What we do is we use the MCD that we created in partnership with the department, and we have the medical professional sign that they are qualified in that, or qualified or certified in that area to be able to make that examination and make that determination. And if you look at the MCD, that is STU 19. It lists all the individual disabilities, and then they are required to sign that they are proficient or certified to make that determination for a disabling condition.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
I guess we're half an hour in, and I've actually at some point got to go back to school buildings and sit through some meetings. But I guess it's frustrating to me that this is going to take a long time. Matt's in a tough position. He worked for a private organization. So you've got folks at the table here that have been doing this sort of work for decades. And so at the rate we're going, the inaccuracies are so frequent and not by anybody's. Ed 110704 has absolutely very little to do with EFAs, meaning that's how, students in school districts are identified. There is really very little process for identifying kids in EFAs. So by putting these numbers here, it looks as though there is a process when in fact there isn't. My understanding is that the DOE doesn't know what of the 890 kids that get differentiated aid for special ed, which ones come from an IEP process, which is very rigorous, versus which ones come from this private organization's process, which I'm kind of blown away that taxpayer money is going in that direction with so little rigor as far as who's identified and who isn't. But I guess my biggest frustration is just sitting here thinking that there's so much to get through for a report at the end of this committee, and I think at this rate, there's so much misinformation, it's hard to sit here. My apologies if I was out of line. I think I spoke with Becky as I arrived here today. The data on the number of students identified with disabilities is very inflated and not accurate for multiple reasons. So when we talk, and I read every article that comes out in the newspaper about the increase in identified students, we're not even clear on that data. The district I work in, the data reported at the DOE is 5% higher than it actually is. And Becky can speak to why that is. But so I think if we were truly to do this process, effectively and honestly and upfront, it would be with data that's accurate and with information. Ed 110704 qualified examiners does not apply to EFA other than they will accept a student with an IEP and give them the differentiated aid.
Correct. Rebecca?
So for EFAs, I believe they do need to fall under one of those 13 categories in order to qualify. So that is why it's referenced, because while it's not the examiners that you're referencing, it's the disabilities that you're referencing. So they must fall within those categories. And in New Hampshire, we also have traumatic brain injury as well as acquired brain injury. So it actually makes 14.
So, but for a school district, a child could have any one of those disabilities and still not be eligible for special ed. Whereas for the EFA program, if you have one of those disabilities, you automatically get that differentiated aid.
Right.
So there's a number of kids in our districts that have all of those disability categories, but it doesn't have an impact on their ability to benefit from education, so they don't get an IEP. So it's a much more fluid, generous identification under the EFA system than it is under the school system. And schools are buckling just to meet the needs of the students in the school system. So that's sort of where I'm at as far as the process we're going through.
Further discussion on that point? The concern that we have how many kids receiving differentiated aid in the EFA program? You said 800.
Concern about the number of students in the state that are identified outside of EFAs is not accurate, meaning that's my concern. I could be, please prove me wrong, but my concern is that we're all dealing with data that's not, it's misleading in the sense that the numbers are inflated because the way the Department of Ed tracks the number of kids with IEPs is different than the actual kids being serviced or served in public schools.
Yeah, I believe it's 890 if you include
890.
disabling condition, and it's around 240 with strictly school district documentation.
So over 600 that don't have school district documented disabilities, yet they're receiving the differentiated aid.
Yes.
Representative Ames.
Are those numbers that we've just been given in one of these documents?
Yes, in the minutes, I just noted, I wasn't here last time, but it says that 890 students in the EFA program.
It was on the sheet that it's on the cover page of this, but it's also in the sheet that I provided last week on the number of EFAs. The number that was not provided, I don't think it's on either document, is the 240 that qualify under the qualifications for IDA, and then the 600 plus for
I guess my question
disabling
is,
condition.
are there any details on those 240, is that what you said? Students that are qualified just by the certification of the identification by one of these qualified MCDs that they fall into one or another of the categories in the statute.
There's actually 600 plus. It's more of the kids qualify under the EFA process by far than the kids who qualify under.
Okay, well, that's what I was after.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just for the record, because this is an important part of the discussion, if I have it correctly, we're talking about 600 approximately 600 students having a qualification through a disabling condition, and approximately 240 which have an IEP or some other certification that links back to schools.
They were determined by a school district to qualify for special education using the criteria in the 1100 that you referenced earlier. And all of those examiners did the exams that are required under IDA to make that determination. So for IDA, you need to complete all the exams that are in that chart, not just one exam. So they would have to have all of those, and then all of those are reviewed to make that determination.
And that portion is 240 students.
Yeah, and so they had either been in a district or they went to a district and had that paperwork completed. Yeah.
Okay, so just I'm trying to follow up a little further. I'm trying to understand this smaller number that simply has a report from an MCD.
It's a larger number, right?
It's the larger number. The
600.
larger number. I keep reversing it. The larger number of young people who are identified simply by a statement by one of the experts, let's call them experts, that child has autism, or that child is in the deaf or the blind category. What do you receive from the examiners, and what do you review, and how do you review it?
So it varies, but at the minimum, we have to receive that document that says they performed their evaluation. It has to be signed. We have to know their credentials, and it has to state what their diagnosis is. Oftentimes, obviously, we receive additional information because that's very, very helpful when we are adjudicating expenses. The more information that they can give us is helpful. So for example, a child that's blind and deaf, they might have different or special needs when they're purchasing supplies or equipment or services, and then we can adjudicate something that may not normally be allowable, and it helps us to determine whether or not that individual student would be able to receive that service or item.
Yes.
How would a physician identify a child as having a specific learning disability?
So again, I'm not an expert in special education or a physician, but for example, I would say that like the table that the school districts use, they would go to an ophthalmologist or, I assume that the parent would take them to the proper professional that would be able to identify that disability using the same methodology that a school district would use.
So we're making the assumption that that's already occurred, meaning the associate, okay.
I want to follow up just to that point. Writing down today, I was thinking about this whole program, and I was looking at learning disability. You may have a child that's exceptional in mathematics, but has a hard time spelling or has the language skills are not developed. So you have that huge discrepancy. So it's a learning disability. And it's identified by the school psychologist or folks on board, teachers, that there is this discrepancy. We've gone through and we've looked at, various assessment instruments to determine that. We've looked at academic performance in the classroom. I can understand how a medical doctor can address things that are really therapeutic in nature, speech pathology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, traumatic brain injury, on down the list. But then when we get into this domain here, which is a domain which I, as a past principal, saw a lot of students like this, which had this discrepancy between certain areas and functions, whether it be learning style, teaching style, whatever. But I somehow, then I started thinking, well, jeepers, if they got this physical handicap, then they would be eligible maybe for Medicaid direct to the school monies, but they're not going to receive that in your area, I don't believe. Or in the future, would we be responsible for that? I'm just looking at the costing of this. Special education is consuming a lot of our state dollars right now, and we have to look at efficiencies. We have to look at how we're accountability. We're having to look at the audit process, and I'm concerned that when we're audited to ensure that the IEP goals are being met and achieved or addressed, then these, I don't know how that works within the EFA program, and I'm just honestly not aware of it. You know, whether there's a follow-up, there's a confidential record kept somewhere. I don't understand that. Yet we're also funding $2,100 plus per year for that particular student.
Well, I think certainly one reason for the increase can be that we've put in place a mechanism that allows students to be identified with very little oversight, right? So of course, I mean, if we've got 890 kids receiving differentiated aid and 600 plus have not gone through a process to really indicate that whatever the disability is having an impact on their ability to benefit from education, of course those numbers will go up. And I think really teasing out the accuracy of the numbers and how they're going up is important.
Rebecca, the other Rebecca.
Representative Murray also had her hand up.
okay.
Let me go first.
And then we'll go down to
Thank you.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Chairman Ladd. Thanks for trying to answer all of our millions of questions. I have a couple of questions. First, about the IEP. If a student comes to you, for example, in the 8th grade to apply for the EFA, if they bring an IEP for their documentation of their disabling condition, does it need to be a current IEP or can it be from any point in time?
So we've asked the department for guidance. Initially, it had to be an unexpired IEP, but that's since been updated, and it can be an IEP at any time unless the child has, under certain conditions, right? If the child has exited the IEP, then it's no longer valid. If the child, if the parent decided that they no longer wanted the IEP services for any reason, then that also would not be valid. Or if the team decided that the student no longer needed the IEP, then that would no longer be valid either.
Okay, so can I just ask a follow-up question? So understandably, if the student has gone through the process at the school district level and has been exited because they no longer are eligible,
Right.
that would not count. If the parent has rejected the IEP that they bring in for some reason, which would be documented in the IEP,
Correct.
then that would not be valid.
It would not, no.
And what was the last one that you said that people decided they no longer needed it?
Yeah.
So that's the same, I think, as exited?
Yeah, okay.
Right? Okay, I'm just checking about that. Can I ask one more follow-up question? When you're talking about the qualified examiners, I'm trying to decipher the difference between when a school district is using that table of qualified examiners to look at eligibility. The examiners are tied to certain tests that they are qualified to give. They're qualified examiners to give certain tests. There are many, as I think Becky or Jen had mentioned, tests within a disability category that the child needs to undergo in order to make that decision. So a child might have 3 or 4 exams, for example, and the qualified examiners for each might be different. A school psychologist can give this kind of exam, a teacher can give this kind of exam. But is what you're saying is that if a parent brings in documentation of a disability, it can be anybody off of all of those exam lists, regardless of whether or not they're tied to a specific exam that they're qualified to give?
Yeah, we would assume that who they're bringing them to would be qualified as they sign that document under penalty of perjury, correct?
Okay, but, so for example, if a certified educator is listed under autism, for example, because they are qualified to give an academic exam, could a certified educator also write a letter for a parent and bring that in, and they would say that that was, because they're under the table for autism, that would then qualify them?
Yeah, I don't believe so.
You
but-
don't believe so? Okay.
Don't they, if,
Let's
Yeah.
get Representative Murray and then
yeah, I just
Rebecca
wanted
will-
to tell you
will
that, don't
take
they
it.
have to be a medical professional in order to give you a
Right.
document? That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, so the certified educators or other examiners on that list that are not also carrying a
Yeah,
medical
correct.
license?
That list is vast because again, it's in context of a school district.
Right, okay, thank you very much.
Representative Murray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for taking my question. So one of the questions that I also had was, you seem to indicate that an individual can bring forward a current IEP or one that has perhaps lapsed. But once the individual has qualified, are there any steps that you need to go through to redetermine qualification processes? Or is it a single approval and then that exists for the student for the rest of their existence
Well,
within the
to
scholarship?
qualify for differentiated aid, yes, they do need to requalify each year and upload the documentation. So I would assume that if the IEP expired or if it was out of date, then yes, they would need to either use an MCD or upload that IEP again, and we would probably want additional documentation.
I'm getting a little confused here now.
Uh-oh.
Now, you say if they're requalified,
Yeah, we have to requalify for differentiated aid every year.
I understand that's like your October 1 deadline
Yeah.
for differentiated, but by requalifying, is the student then going to have another letter from a medical physician?
They
or-
do. For the
Each year?
MCD, correct, yeah. We have to redocument that.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
So you're saying for an MCD, it is a yearly qualification, but if
Correct.
there is an IEP, is that the same level or standard?
I believe that if it is expired, they have to provide additional information, but let me double check on that. I don't want to give you, bad information.
Yes, Tim.
Morning. Just a couple quick questions. Is there any analysis or requirement regarding whether services that would be provided under differentiated aid have been refused by insurance?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
So if a family came and they were looking for differentiated aid, and let's just say, sake of argument, they had insurance,
Okay,
do they have to exhaust that first?
I would assume so, yeah.
I mean, before they would.
We say in our parent agreement that you have to use your insurance.
Okay,
first, correct?
yeah, and then the other question I had, because it has occurred in my dealings, what about when an out of state IEP?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if we've actually seen that before.
Well, take that back
That's
to
a great
whoever.
question, yeah.
I mean, there is that delineation between Massachusetts and Vermont IEPs coming into New Hampshire, and they're quite different.
Can I,
I am familiar with them.
quick,
Yes.
thank you. An SLP, a speech language pathologist, would that suffice as a qualifying examiner for the MD process to be identified, for a student to be identified with autism or speech language impairment?
I think that they would know better than us, right? If they're a medical professional and they're certified to be able to make that determination, and they are willing to sign under penalty of perjury.
So it doesn't have to be a physician. It could be a any medical professional. Okay.
So when a student returns from the EFA program to a public school, for example, hypothetically, and they were receiving funding that's differentiated aid associated with one of these areas of disability, is that school going to follow through on, let's say it's a deafness or autism or something such as this? Are they going to have to go through the IEP process when they return to the school?
I would assume so. Yeah. I mean, that's a district decision, but I
Director?
don't think they would accept an MCD.
Right, so
It's a little bit loud up here. I'm gonna restore it.
So if they previously had an IEP and had an evaluation, they could go back and the district would consider whether the evaluation was still valid, and then they would either assess them or not assess them. If they had a disabling condition, they do not qualify for special education under IDEA, and they would need to go through the entire process to be determined eligible for special education services.
Thank you. That clarifies it. Yes, Wayne.
Thank you. And there's a number given here in the handout of $2 million in differentiated aid for disabling conditions.
Right.
Is there a requirement that $2 million is spent on items that are for the disabling condition, or can the parent or the EFA recipient spend that money on whatever they wish to spend it on?
So differentiated aid, my understanding, it's unrestricted funds at school districts.
That is correct. It's
Yeah.
not targeted money for an SAU
But when I,
or a school district. In other words, it comes under the aid which we provide for the opportunity for an adequate education. It's one of those three differentiated categories. And if you look at the last part within that statute, it says the sum total of these three categories and base costs make up the costing for delivering adequate education.
So schools receive differentiated aid, and there's a rigorous Form 25 they have to go through and identify what they're spending that money on. The question is, if parents receive differentiated aid annually over $2,000 per child, do they have to spend that differentiated aid in any way in particular related to the student's disability?
so I did look up to see what that money was being spent on in it. And just briefly, a lot of speech therapy, neuropsychological concussion management, Prosper therapy, Reach for the Top therapy services, a lot of therapeutic services. And I mean, I can give you a list, obviously, without students.
But is there a
names.
requirement that they spend
There's
it?
no requirement. No, they buy a lot of curriculum and materials.
Representative Murray?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for taking my question, Mr. Sutherson. I'm also curious to know whether or not the monies that are allocated for differentiated aid, while there is no, it appears, requirement for them to be spent in any certain way relative to a disabling condition or an IEP, but do you require that the list you just read off of, for example, that there is a metric for efficacy or best practice standards to be met by the people providing those services to ensure that the students are making adequate progress towards some sort of goal?
Any provider that provides service or instruction to students in New Hampshire, they all need to be vetted to make sure they're a legitimate provider. And then obviously any service or item that is purchased with EFA funds needs to be EFA allowable. And all of those are looked at individually by human eyes. So they wouldn't be able to spend EFA funds, or whether it's differentiated aid or adequacy aid, on, buying the jet ski or using it for nefarious purposes.
May
Yes.
That's not what I'm asking. What I'm actually asking about is whether or not there is a requirement to determine whether or not the student still needs the service and then is being given the differentiated aid. For example, when students are in a traditional IEP program, those processes are continually documented and monitored to determine whether or not that is necessary.
Well, I mean, I think if a child has autism, or if a child is blind and deaf, I think that probably the best judge of whether they need those services or not is probably going to be the parents and the doctor. That we're not in that position to evaluate that. I think the parents and the doctor are going to be the ones that are going to decide whether they need those services. and whether they're working or not. And if they're not working, they're probably going to find another doctor or another, provider.
Representative Ames?
So if you take it down to the level of one parent and one child, the child of that parent, who has been identified as having what do you call it, a disabling condition, but that's it, no special ed process. So that parent then receives the base amount, $4,000 plus $2,300 roughly, because of the disabling condition. So that's the differentiated aid. So now we're talking about $6,300, $6,400 or so. If that parent were to spend it entirely for tuition at a private school, would that be a problem?
It would be allowable.
It would be allowable. And there'd be no investigation beyond what I've just said into what services the child's receiving at the private school?
No, I mean, it would be an allowable expense.
Okay, thank you.
I think we need to get something clarified right here now. Differentiated aid and base cost is non-targeted money, period. So the school districts can use this money in any which way as long as it's being used for education purposes. We've dealt with that year after year after year. We've got it out of the LBA. We've gotten it from the department. It's not targeted money, even though we may have to say what we're doing in terms of special education. It's not targeted.
It may not be targeted, but you've got a school board that's managing the school system, right?
Yeah.
You've got a whole system of, and I would defer to Dwayne. You've got a whole system of budgeting required by public schools. So it's not directed toward anything necessarily, but there's a whole system of oversight that just doesn't take place when differentiated aid is granted to a parent who may not know the best way to treat their child. Many do, I'm sure. I'm not suggesting parents don't. But if you've got a child with autism, you may want to use experts to help with that.
Dwayne?
The differentiated aid, whether it's for disabling condition or for economic disadvantage, does the 10% administrative fee apply to the differentiated amounts as in addition to the base amount? So, for example, the base amount that a
The
parent gets
administrative fee?
Yes, the 10%.
The administrative fee applies to all categories.
Okay.
And I think that we run 7.9%, and then the 2% is given back to the families. So while we can take 10%, we don't. We currently run at about 7.9%, and then the additional monies are given back to the families at the end of the year when it's reconciled.
That's what the oversight committee has been informed of many, many times.
So unlike a for-profit, we don't take all the money. We try to run as efficiently as possible, and then those additional funds are given back to the families.
So, sorry, you go ahead.
Or for further scholarships, additional
Oh,
scholarships.
yeah, additional scholarship money.
That's correct.
So,
Yes, Representative Marie?
thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for taking my question. So, who determines then? You're saying you keep roughly 7%, according to Mr. Ford's question. How do you determine what dollar value amount you're giving each individual family back, or is it apportioned across the entire group of families? Or
It is that are active in the EFA at that time. That's my understanding. So at the end of the year, the accountants, the CFOs, cost up how much the program costs for the year, and then obviously we run as economically as possible, as efficiently as possible to provide as best a service as we can. And again, we're a nonprofit. Our mission is to serve children and to run the best program that we can in the country. We've won awards 2 years in a row, and our mission is to help those kids. We are not here to make money. We want to do as best a job as possible, and that's why we don't take the full administrative fee, and we give that money back in scholarship funds to those kids.
So 8% is the administrative fee.
That's what we're running at. And
So-
obviously, we hope to do better as the program scales.
So 8%, I mean, when I think about, we talked about private approved public special education schools that the DOE does rate setting for, the 5% increase annually has been burdensome. Is there, you mentioned, are there accountants paid for, or are there accountants in your organization that are employees? And how many, and who oversees the organization? Who provides the oversight for you folks?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a board. We're a nonprofit charity. We have a board. Our 990's online. We're audited annually. We have, a CFO, CEO. Again, all of that information is online, available on our website. Anyone can look it up. The law, the EFA law and the contract, we're supposed to, we're audited annually.
How many people are on the board?
Oh, gosh, I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I apologize. I should know that. But, and again, unlike a for-profit, our mission is to help those kids and to do as best job as we can and as economically as possible. And again, it's across the states, a 10% administrative fee to run a charity is the norm, right? A school district, I love public schools. I don't want to get into this debate of who costs more, right? I love public schools. My brother's a public school administrator. My sister's a public school teacher. So I don't want to get into that debate of who costs more. But again, we try to do a good job and as for, inexpensive as possible. So.
There is a legislative oversight committee for this organization, and there's other avenues which they are held accountable to as well. So we've dealt with this in another group totally.
Sorry.
I think what we got to really spin our wheels on is the differentiated aid, the amount, the costing of it, and that's our purpose here. My purpose, I just need to know more information on how this is working. Does your money lapse at the end of the year, or is it non-lapsing?
For the students,
For the amount of money which you receive, the average of $5,200, whatever it might be per student,
yeah, it carries over from year to year.
it's non-lapsing
It
money.
does, yeah.
So is that money, when it non-lapses, then used to allow more scholarships in the following year, or you redistribute the balance, which may be left over from that administrative side when you're down to the 7.9, or let's call it 2% of what you would have of what you're eligible to receive or take out, and then you say at the end of the year it's distributed back to those parents which are in the program.
Correct.
Would it be better used to offset some of the costs, or to award more scholarships in the following year rather than having to go backwards with the money?
Yep, that's
That's another question. Yeah.
not a question for me.
Excuse me.
Yes, Representative Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks again for taking my question. So I'm curious. I just want to clarify. So you do take the full 10%. You give a portion back, and that seems to be the statement there. But I am curious to know if a student has then already received their full disbursement of funds. Do you give monies above and beyond then? So if that percentage that is given back to families, is that an additional overage potentially above and beyond if a student has maximized what they can receive in an award?
No. So what happens is that the 10% is taken off the top for the administrative fee, and then they're apportioned the remaining dollars, and it's just like public schools. They're apportioned 4 disbursements throughout the year. And those are broken down, and the first disbursement is 20%, the second is 20%, the third is 30%, and the fourth is 30%, just like a public school district, right? So then again, at the end of the year, if we came in under 10%, which we always do, those remaining funds are dispersed through the active students in the EFA program.
And when we're talking about the total amount a student receives for a scholarship, we're only talking the differentiated aid part of it, which is roughly $2 million. 10% of that is X number of dollars. You can figure that out quickly. And if there's a little bit left over, so we're really talking, if we're addressing special ed costing here, we're not addressing the other side of the coin with the base cost and all that, which goes over. So in terms of what we're looking at, $977 million per year, we're talking here something that's probably less than a tip money.
But I think that to put it into context, when you're talking about the larger number, you're talking about all of the special ed programming that is reproduced in charter schools, right? And the transportation costs and contractual costs that are associated with that. Then you're adding on top of that this EFA money that is given very generously to students who have a physician sign off that they have a disability. I mean, that's what we need to look at. We need to look, I think, at the larger numbers. So yes, special ed costs are going up, but what have been the causes and the triggers for that rise, right? This may just be one of those that, the other thing is that it sounds as though the average EFA scholarship is over $5,000. So the average student that's taking advantage of an EFA falls into differentiated aid for many things, right? It's not just special education.
No.
So and how do you verify
Special
that?
education.
No, there's differentiated aid for ELL, there's differentiated aid for free and reduced lunch. So the average, it's not just students with disabilities that are getting the extra funding.
Right. So you mentioned,
Right.
free and reduced lunch eligibility. Obviously, they would have to qualify, with their financial documents. Right. So,
And that's a whole different.
correct.
Yeah.
And they have to do that every year as well.
Right.
Again, differentiated aid you have to requalify each
Right.
year.
I didn't believe the EFA program was receiving differentiated aid for ELL or F&R.
They are.
I thought it was strictly special ed.
No. Parents are receiving it, yeah.
You can get differentiated.
Well, further questions of scholarship organization here? Thanks an awful lot, Matt. So we have another area on the docket here for today, our follow-up discussion with the New Hampshire Department of Education, Special Education Finance. I'd like to jump down to the second point first, the DOE 25 form. When we're looking at the DOE 25 form, Rebecca, or do you have your finance person here now?
Yes, Zach is in the audience, if he can come up.
He can come on up, yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
When we're talking about a DOE 25 form, the annual report, and we're looking at special education costs here, is that report break down the special ed costs to areas like labor, to administration, to physical plant costs, to transportation costs associated with special education, and other areas, maybe equipment, supplies?
Yes, but I don't know, like, it does break some stuff out. I don't know all of the specifics because we don't do the DOE 25. That comes from a different bureau within the department.
It comes from the Division of Educational Analytics and Resources. So we pulled the data regarding special education from the DOE 25. And we looked at, and Zach looked at the data from the DOE 25 related to special education.
So my next question would be though, can we get that information for each district as far as what are the costs for special education for this district in these categories so we can see where we're going?
Yes, yeah, it's on our website. I don't think it would help us determine some of the issues at this stage, but you can find it. It is on our website. Each district has to submit one.
Mark provides that or?
Representative
Yes.
Ladd. So I don't want to overreach or whatever, but I've done those for 25 years, DOE 25, and a lot of it has to do to start with how your accounting system is set up and how you actually code and expense things. But what you've just said is required to be reported in the supplemental section of the DOE 25. You have to, for special education, you have to break that down by wages, benefits, contracted services, supplies, equipment, and other, by grade level. So for some districts that have multiple buildings and maybe multiple elementary schools or whatever, you've got to break that down. And so that can be really time consuming, or that can be easy depending on how you do the pre-work, how your accounting system's set up. But not only do you have to report that by those categories, you have to report related services associated with special education. Those are usually in different function areas like speech and OT, PT, things like school psych. You have to do transportation, administration, legal. I'm going to look down and cheat. I think that's all of them. But you mentioned something on the sheet here like facilities. We wouldn't break facilities down in special education costs because the facility cost is the facility cost for everybody. We wouldn't break down, for example, like when you were a principal, we wouldn't break down your time into special education, even though you have a really big function in it. That wouldn't be broken down. When we talk about administration, we talk about like building coordinators or director of student services, director of special ed. So all of those things have to be reported in that supplemental section by district. Now, I want to speak for Mark and his group because they're great, and I'm sure they can do this, but they could, and it'd be this massive data sheet, but you could get all of those data points by district.
So you don't break it down then, Dwayne, by that if you have a physical therapy room with all the equipment, you have a resource room where students go to that resource room, they're special ed. You have a school nurse that's working with some of these students, which may have a medical portion of their IEP. So part of that facility, showers and all, may be associated more with that IEP than others. So you don't break that down. That's just under all the, okay.
That would be in the facilities grounds section of the budget, which is, for function code stuff, it'd be 2,600 is where all that would be.
As a rule of thumb, what we typically look at when we're talking to people is special education is supplemental. So if you took special education away, what's still left once you take special education away? And those are costs that you would pay through regular education. So if you already have a building, you're not going to pay for a building through special education. You already have a principal, you're not going to pay for a principal through special education. Because if you took special education away, those things would still be there. So that's kind of how we look at it when we're trying to explain it to people, is that it's all, and it's considered supplemental. So it's in addition to what you're already doing for all children.
And then, the one other thing I would say about that form is it has a lot of additional uses for us internally as an SAU or, administrative for our special ed administrators. So for example, when we apply for IDA grant, we've got to fill out a form that is called a maintenance of effort form. The cost for special education that we're going to use on that form is going to come right from the DOE 25, or at least it should. That's my opinion. That's where ours comes from. So you need to prove as part of that grant what you spent, how it compares to the previous year, what your identified population is, how that compares to the previous year. So those things are, that's a really, I think, critically important section of that annual financial report that we have to do every year.
The maintenance of effort is quite a deal when talking about career technical education as well. If we increase that, we're bound to keep going like that. And of course, your match with the federal government and all is contingent upon that. All right, other
I
questions?
just have one thing
Yes.
for the record, just to make sure for those watching at home and online. Zach, your first and last name and your official title with the Finance Department of
Sure.
Special Education. Sorry.
My name is Zach Jakes. I am the office administrator for for finance and data within the Bureau of Special Education.
Thank you. Yeah.
So we can access the information on this DOE 25 form if we want the aggregate for the whole state, or if we want to go by is it by SAUs or is it by school districts?
It's by school district.
By school districts. Wow, that'd be a lot of paperwork.
And I don't think it would help us now at this stage. I think using the state totals would identify a lot of the areas I think that we can at least look at in terms of costs. And then once we control the controllables, I think that's when you can start to really dial into the district levels and seeing are there things that are going on in terms of a regional thing, or is it a size?
Well,
does that
that's
make
where
sense?
I was trying to slip down and slope towards the small schools where I would expect the costs are going to be on a per capita basis higher.
I think
And-
there are, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And then the resources which they have to provide, which are reflected on that DOE, whether it be the transportation costs or whatever, are going to be higher on a per capita basis. And so that's something that we may want to look at in terms of costing out where the dollars flow and how they flow.
I think even with some of the bigger districts, though, I think there are some areas that affect all of them, though. And I think if we attack those ones first, I think once we control those and get a good baseline, then we can start to look at things at a district level. That's just my opinion,
So,
obviously. But
so going back to the macro and looking at, as you've said several times, the increasing costs, I think we have to take into consideration all the changes over the last 5 to 10 years, including the fact that the state's receiving almost 20 million less annually in Medicaid to schools because of a rule change that was made, including the rate setting of private school facilities, right? Going up 5% annually. Transportation, I think if we get too close into the micro data, we're missing the bigger picture and what's actually, causing some of these increases.
I don't know if I totally agree because I come from those micro areas and the costs are extremely high. And if we see the cost for a service up here for one district and down here per capita, there's got to be a way to help provide the resource to those which don't have the base to really satisfy the ones which are costing so much.
Well, I can tell you from my experience of working in large city districts where we had 11 school psychologists for 22 schools and working in smaller districts where we've had a school psychologist for every building. It's all based on the amount of per pupil expenditures they have to allocate. So there's going to be great variability just because of the way New Hampshire funds education overall.
If I can.
Rebecca?
And I would also say that there's great variability depending upon who you're contracting with, because there's no set standard of what you can charge for physical therapy. It's based upon that company and who you're contracting with to receive those services. They have no control over how that company might charge them. If you're up north, you may get maybe charged more for physical therapy because they're harder to find. When you're down south, you might be able to find more of them and you're not going to have that cost that's as high. So the rates vary because the companies are independent and they make their own rates, and there's no guidance that says you can't go higher than this or lower than this. It's just you have to accept what that company gives you for a rate for those services.
I was going to say, is that more of a just a market rate depending on what the market demands? Is that what you're speaking to?
And like, for example, I pulled some stuff today. So I looked at transportation because that's one of the areas I think that costs are
Skyrocketing.
all over the place. So I looked at 4 different vendors this morning. So for the first vendor, I pulled one of their invoices and they charge $425 for a daily rate up to 30 miles. And then any mileage over that, they charge $5. So for this one student who needed to travel 48.6 miles round trip, it cost the district $518 a day. For that same vendor, they charge $350 up to 30 miles for somebody else. And there was no extra mileage on top of that because wherever they're going, I'm assuming it was within that 30-mile radius or trip. So vendor number 2, they charged $124 a day. And this student went round trip 73.4 miles. The same vendor charged $318 a day for a 112-mile round trip. And then they charged $245 per day for 3 kids to be round trip 80 miles. Another vendor, $609 a day. In round trip, this was 90 miles. And then vendor number 4, they just charged a flat rate per month of $7,200.
I think an interesting part of this is that there was a time when districts had their own transportation, right? They'd buy their own buses. Now there are very few vendors and they sort of have a monopoly and you have no choice but to utilize those vendors because it's so hard to staff a transportation.
It's in a very tough spot because in one end, it's taxpayer money, right? So like you need to do your due diligence, you need to do your homework and make sure you are spending it appropriately, right? On the flip side, you have to do this, and if you do that, you might be denying FAPE. So you're in a really tough position here where it's like, okay, well, one of these things is going to get me in really deep trouble if I don't get this student what they need. I can just pay this extra money or whatever they're charging me because I don't have any other option. And guess what? Everyone's happy. There's no letters to the school board. There's no findings, no nothing. We're good. However, now you have to pay whatever they charge you.
Representative Dry?
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Just to clarify, if you have multiple students in a vehicle, do they charge per student or just the trip itself?
It's honestly whatever they want to do.
And
Depends on the company.
the company, not the contract you have with them.
Oh.
Is that something you can negotiate?
And honestly, I don't know if it is a contract thing where are you able to go to all these different companies and be like, well, what would you charge us? Or is it like, and who knows, like maybe you can speak to it more, right?
Sure. I mean, I think that's the big thing with transportation. I think is you contact as many options as you have. You know, some will flat out say no. We'll just say no. We don't have a driver. We don't have a vehicle. We're not going there. Whatever. And then you know what we do is we have a relationship with a number of different entities that do this, and we usually pick the lowest one or try to piggyback with another one. But your question is, and one of our school boards has been very involved because they see the bills and they see, well, we have two kids in the same vehicle going to the same place. Why are we being charged twice? That's the best deal we could get. There are some districts I think that totally will put out a blanket request for proposal and say, here's where we think we're going to go. Tell us how much that will cost, just flat fee. And then if you make changes to that, you sometimes have to pay more or whatever. But that's where like a $7,200 a month would come from. But you kind of have to need to know where you're going, and it changes. And I feel like the last several years, it's changed more frequently than it used to. It used to be you kind of had these defined places that you would go. And we have this one's new, that one's changing. We're going over here. We're not going here anymore. And it's very, very difficult. And I think the transportation expense, I tell our boards, not to belabor that, but the difficulty that we've had finding school bus drivers, they've had the same problem. Mm-hmm. And they're more fluid and flexible in offering more money, offering different benefits, offering different routes. And those increased costs that they have, they're just going to be passed on to us. So,
Rebecca Wilson, Becky, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman Lett. Yeah, I think one aspect to just also consider when you're dealing with special education transportation is, again, that's a service that's determined by an IEP team that a child needs based on their unique needs. And there are situations where not only can you not find a transportation company that has availability to go to whatever placement that you have decided as a team is where this student needs to be placed, but you're also trying to look at the time the student is going to be in that vehicle, what other students from other districts, while still protecting kids' privacy, are going to be in that vehicle. What does that mean in terms of supervision in the vehicle? Does there need to be a aide in the transportation vehicle? Does the transportation company have an aide that can ride on that bus? There's lots of different pieces to that. If they're a younger child, do they need a special transportation? Is there a car seat involved or a wheelchair? I mean, there's all these aspects to coordinating transportation. And then if you overlay on that the lack of options for districts to pull from for some of these transportation situations, when you find someone where all of those planets align, you are going to take it to the best of your ability because, again, you need it to be able to provide the student the program that you've agreed to provide them.
Representative Murray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And am I right in assuming, obviously, Mr. Ford spoke to the fact that things go out to RFP, but if there's a sole provider for a highly specialized vehicle, sometimes that's it. You've got one provider, one vehicle, you have to take that. Is that accurate in to what you're seeing in some of those very...
Sometimes, I mean, I don't know what happens at the district level. I only see invoices of charges and whatnot, right? Mm-hmm. So for all I know, it might be one of those specialized vehicles that has a lift or something like that. So I went through and I looked at some of these this morning and I was like, obviously the IEP might not necessarily, and you might be able to speak to this more, that the IEP might not necessarily say that they're in a wheelchair or something like that they have some sort of physical ailment that they need a special vehicle. But the ones that I was looking at, it didn't really look like it, but you're still paying $600 to take a van
Right.
for an hour?
And,
Like
sorry,
a lot?
one more follow-up if I
Go
may.
follow up then, Tim.
And it's also true that whether or not it's an actually a highly specialized vehicle that allows for a lift or clip-ins for chairs or whatever, if it's a child who's in kindergarten, for example, there are different laws and rules that dictate where a child can be dropped off at. So it does change the conversation about where and how transportation works for a child with special ed.
Hi there. One of my questions, I think I might know the answer to it, but I don't know if you have hard data on it, is whether or not these big disparities in costs are associated at all with regions. I know, for example, in my area, if a special ed student needs to go to Spalding I live in the Mascoma district, they have to go 118. And that's no cell phone signal, and I have to know it's part of the rate, given the profile of the student, and going that road is not an easy road in the wintertime anyways. And up north, I'm wondering if the rates are higher after we get, north of Concord and Keene.
No, so it was a good question. So a lot of these invoices that I pulled this morning, they're pretty much traveling in the same areas. They're either going to where the other vendor just left from or whatnot. So, and to your point, it's not like they're traveling, past the White Mountains into the middle of nowhere. Like these are, the southwest, southern parts of the state. And they're all over the place in terms of the cost.
Rebecca?
So while we do have the data, we haven't analyzed it in that way. So we could go through each of the, 800 and some odd kids that we have and say, all of these kids are here, all of these kids are here, and then analyze it. We don't have the capacity to do that right now, but we do have the data that we could look at that for those 800 kids that apply for special education aid.
As we do our normal course of business, I'm always trying to find things that just don't look right or don't sit well, and try to see, like, is there a pattern, or is there something that's going on here? So every now and then I'll pull things and be like, well, this is the same company, but you're charging, 2 different rates, and you're not really in different parts of the world. You're kind of in each other's backyard. So this doesn't make any sense.
So a follow-up to you, Rebecca, then, if you have a student that is receiving transportation costs and a parent probably on the bus, so now you're reaching into catastrophic aid. When you talk to that school district that's sending this cost to you for some support for when you get to that 70,000 mark, then going beyond, are you requiring the school district, as Medicaid to schools would require mileage logs, are you required to give mileage logs as well?
They submit to us they don't submit to us the mileage, they submit the attendance log, so it shows if the child was there for the trip to the school and then for the trip back. And if the child was absent that day, we don't pay for that. The district may have to pay that cost because they've made a contract and they've said, I'm gonna pay you $2,700 a month for transportation. But when they submit to us, for transportation, we do not pay for a day that the child is absent.
So if, in looking at the bottom of our agenda here, I went the other night and looked at discussed documentation and payment for services on the MTS, the Medicaid to Schools program. They have listed underneath that all these items which are required. It says students' current care plan, IEP, the attendance, credentials of licensure staff, evidence of service implementation, i.e. mileage logs.
Correct. Yeah, for Medicaid. Oh,
So
for
you're gonna
Medicaid,
go
we have to do
back
that.
And
It doesn't actually have mileage on it though, does it? It's just
Some
the child.
logs might.
Okay.
Honestly, it depends on the log that they submit.
And the
Because some of
contract.
them are nice and neat, and you'll have, they were present, absent, and they might have the number of kids that were on in the vehicle, the mileage, that sort of thing, but it's not consistent. And
So I
I like that word consistent, and I'm not hearing consistent.
not much.
So a little inside baseball kind of thing. So I'll use Bo as an example. We have our own buses and we also contract. So we do both. The transportation logs that we do internally do include a lot of detail because we're able to do that. Like we just say, you know, if you're going to do this, this is what you have to fill out every single day, and it includes a lot of detail. Some of the contracted providers will do what was suggested, that they'll just give you, here, you know, here's where we went, basically enough so that you qualify for Medicaid to schools. That's what they're going to give you,
Yeah.
and we keep all that stuff. So.
Rebecca? Becky?
In the
Well, Becky's.
for some Medicaid to schools students as well that qualify for that and who have also specialized transportation for a time, and I have not done it in a couple of years, so I would want to check, but there was some discernment when you put in for transportation for students that if you were using a shared transportation vehicle, you could only count the mileage for which that child was actually on the bus. So if they picked up other students first, you had to deduct that mileage from the daily trip and only count the time from when they picked that kid up to when they dropped them off or vice versa. So that might be where the mileage piece is coming in, because some staff have to calculate somewhere, whether it's at the transportation company or at the district level, how much of that round trip that kid is actually on the physical bus.
And for us, for the IEP, when we review special education aid, we look at what the IEP says, and it says per trip. So it may say that they get 2 trips per day. It doesn't say they're going to go however many miles. It goes by trip. So we ensure that the child was present for the trips that are allowed within their IEP, because we're not going to pay for it if they took 3 trips and their IEP says only 2 per day. We're not going to pay for that third one because it's not allowed within their IEP. But we don't. But it's not mileage on their IEP. That's why there's that difference.
See, in the CTE program, which we passed legislation a year or two ago, it's now miles and number of trips taken and type of vehicle, whether it's a van or it's a large bus, because we have been paying on a per pupil basis at 10 cents a mile. And your 66 passenger bus taking 2 kids, it doesn't really pay anything back, you know. So there's different ways of doing it, and sounds like this is just open for each district to negotiate with a contractor or figure this out. And that's not a consistent process we have for our statewide.
And I don't even know how much negotiating you can do if you don't have many options. There is no negotiating. You're going to pay whatever they tell you.
Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Chairman. I also think in this discussion that I'm hearing from all of us, I think it's important to differentiate between Medicaid to schools billing versus the state's portion of the IEP services, because they're different requirements for different services. And we're kind of comparing apples and oranges to some degree when we're talking about mileage versus a round trip or an attendance log for just the state's portion. There's different requirements within those 2 programs, if you will.
If I can, for some services, it is apples to apples, because you received 2 speech services this week and you submitted for 2 speech services to Medicaid as well. But like transportation, it is apples to oranges because they need you to give mileage, and whereas we're looking at the IEP that says trips. So there are instances where it is the same things you're kind of tracking, but then there are instances where it is not.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
So the other category I would say that is similar to transportation, but is kind of starting to operate in the same manner, is this classification that we have called contracted services, because the same thing that happens in transportation happens there. Like if you don't have your own speech staff and you're going to contract out for speech and language services in your district, you're in the same boat as you are with transportation. Limited number of providers. You're going to go out and contact them and see how much it's going to cost. Those costs, I think, have gone up dramatically in the last few years, and it's a bigger cost center for us. Now, this includes our own staff, but in Bow, contracted services for us is about $1.6 million last year. Transportation was $400,000 in special education. So those are the kind of categories that I think are also, especially in the non-staff world, are growing significantly.
It's honestly happening in all of those. And then if you have more kids that are getting on IEPs And then we start looking at, all right, well, if we start changing where cap is and who qualifies for special education aid, you're basically inviting all of these contracts to be like, well, you're going to pay this, or you can just try to find someone else, and there is no other option. And we're just going to inflate the cost of everything. And I wish I was exaggerating, but like, it's just going to skyrocket. At least that's my opinion. That's what I see from the numbers and, you know, some of the trends and the patterns. Like, it's scary.
Scary in a lot of domains. You know, I deal very closely, and it's Terry Wolf's here too, with career technical education. And we're looking at our statewide budget for transportation around $700,000. We take it out of the 9 million, the rest of it's for tuition. Of course, we're prorating our tuition at 56% of 75%, which we're required to provide, and the transportation, $700,000 for the entire state to go to these 25 or so CTE centers doesn't make it. And so either we have a formula where we reimburse at X number of dollars per mile per student, or however we're doing it, and or we get involved with some kind of a statewide contract for services, if that's possible, or regional services to try. We're going to have to deal with these costs, which are just going to they're slamming us right now. When we prorate special education, you know, costs, and we're at 80%. It's been down as low as 67% or so. And this is one of the issues which we have to address here. You know, we cannot continue to be putting these proration costs back down on the districts because they don't have the funding capacity to support that. So I'm not quite sure I have any answers on how to resolve this. Becky, department's got to come up with something here.
We continue to look at the numbers and have, as I said, you know, there are things that we need to look at. How can we help to control the costs? And unless there's a standardized rate of, unless we're setting rates, there's no way we can control the cost.
This new database that we keep hearing about is, I don't know when that's going to occur, back in 2026, hopefully by June, huh? Maybe?
It probably, it's taking a little bit longer than we thought because we want to make sure that we're doing it correctly. It's probably going to be summer of 27. We want to make that we got into a situation where they weren't quite understanding what we needed, and we were like, no, if you can't do it the way we need it, then we're going to slow down and you're going to do it the way we need it.
So is this database going to be just dealing with DOE, or are you going to cross it over to MTS as well? So they want to have mileage logs and mileage this. You want to have it also. Why don't we get on the same page here?
So that let me talk about the current system. The current system can do that, can work with MTS, and we could be putting logs in, and we already have that capability within the new system. We are looking at doing that within we have the capability in the old system. We are looking to do that in the new system, but it would be something that DHHS would have to agree to work with us to do that and say, yes, we want it to go through our Nessus 2.0, is basically what we call it. We want it to go through Nessus so that you can do that, because much of what we're asking for is the same thing. Transportation, you would have to submit something extra for the mileage piece, but for us, it would be the trips. So we are looking at that capability. It's not the first thing we're looking at. We want to make sure that the system is set up for the students to do their IEPs and get all of those pieces in place. So right now we're trying to ensure that all of that is aligned and is aligned to the law, so we can ensure that it's captured accurately.
Any other questions of the department right now on? I think this is driving to the point that somehow we're going to have to make these recommendations, but we're going to also have to know what's going on with this data program that you're working on. Because that's, I think, one way that we're going to be able to save labor costs. We're going to be able to save a lot of management. We're going to be able to address maybe more consistency in some of those areas where there's a lot of flux. So is it possible that the department could give us an update of where you are on this in terms of working towards this common end with the HHS?
We are not working with HHS currently. We're working with our provider that's building the system. So we're not at the point where we would work with DHHS. I would need to talk to the commissioner about how she wants to move forward with that and MTSS. in the system, we have not gotten to the financial portion yet. So that's, if we were to build it in, and we would like to, it would be in the financial portion. We're still within the IEP phase, I'll say. We haven't gotten to that finance piece yet, because it's, you kind of have you have separate pieces within the system, and finance is separate from the IEP.
Representative Marie?
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding your intentions at the department, that it is to sort of cooperatively talk between yourselves and the Department of Health and Human Services on that singular platform, so that there could be a more streamlined approach for things like MTS.
Yes, or to have our systems speak to each other so that there is some collaboration in that. Like, if we can't have one system, can we speak to their system, or can they speak to our system, so that there is that passing back and forth of information?
I will note though, like all this is really great, but I still don't think that will fix like the overarching like issues that we see in terms of the costs that are rising in special education. I think it'll help, but it's like the reimbursement portions, like that's not going to control the cost that are charged to the districts.
Yeah, they'll track it though. We'll know. So the other area which I had on these meet here for working with the department on is we're going to see legislation real quickly here now where we're backing off the 3.5x down to 3 to 2. How are you going to be able to put together a fiscal report in regard to that? You know, or is it going to be another one of these indeterminables?
To dropping the cap to 60,000.
The 60,000.
So we are able to estimate somewhat only on the numbers that we have this year. So if we looked at our numbers this year, the district submitted for review and documentation $133 million, excuse me, and there's 894 students. With the old formula, the cost to districts would be about 78 million, and the cost to the state is about 54 million. With the new formula, if you go with the 60,000, and I believe it also is the cap of 160 for that bill, it would increase the cost to districts by almost 4 million, and it would decrease the cost to the state by 4 million. And that's just looking at the kids that were submitted for this year. So it really just, it's about, for those 894 students, it would be a $4 million difference. It would go instead of the state paying, it would fall to the district to
Doesn't
pay.
make a big difference.
Not for those 894, no. But that was what we had.
Overall, though.
Overall, yes, it's overall.
From the at the student level though, it did have.
Yeah, there were
changes.
some, so there are, and we did it individually by student, so there are some students that you would receive more on. And then once you get to that $160,000 cap, that's when you start to have, the districts will receive less.
Looking at the second side of our agenda, second page, there is a brief synopsis of how something like this might work for a student that costs $270,000. And you can look at the first line where it says first, the local district will pay the first amount up to $60,000.
Yep.
And the state going across pays nothing at that point. Then you go up from 60,000 to 200,000. The local district's required to pay that difference right there, that $140,000, $28,000, and the state would pay $112,000.
Yep.
So how many students are now down in that bracket? It seems to me that if you had a child at that amount of money, up to 200,000, the local would be seeing some savings.
So on our list, that would be, hold on, about 838 people, 838 students.
Okay.
I just want to make sure. I just wanted to slow down here for a second, if I could.
Yeah.
May I clarify? So, Becky, you were saying that generally speaking, the changes in the formula would overall increase the cost by about $4 million in aggregate to the local districts and decrease the cost to the state by about $4 million.
Yes.
However, when we're looking at just the $270,000 matrix of an individual student, there might be some individual savings.
Yes.
But that's not the case overall.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And you can see how it goes down. If it's a student with 200,000 up to 270,000, then the local pays 7,000 and the state chips in at the 90% rate, 63,000. So, but when you total those columns up, you can see the local share is 95,000 and the state is 175,000, but there would be a cap.
At 160.
And as that's how Arkansas does theirs, and their cap is lower than that amount, you would see that we're over the cap on the state side by $15,000, so that would flop back over to the other side of the column. So the total cost for the $270,000 eligibility cost would be $110,000 on the local and $160,000 on the state. That's briefly how this thing works, but then you get higher,
Yes.
then it's a,
Right, and on our chart, if you get to around 262,000 that you've invoiced to us,
Yeah.
that's where you hit the 160,000 cap.
Yeah.
And so anybody that has spent over 258,000, you're gonna be capped at 160,000. So we, at the bottom, at the highest end of the scale, we have a district that submitted for a student with $591,000 in cost, and they're only going to be reimbursed 160,000.
see, now if we take the number of kids you have at that 500,000, 400 to 500,000, a little over $500,000, that is how many students? We have that
Seven.
chart.
7 students.
Seven
And
students.
these are the numbers we're looking at right now. So this isn't anything that's out right now, but we were like, let's take this year's numbers. Let's look at what it would look like. So there are 7 students that are over 500,000.
One last question how are you getting from the 70,000 mark where you have those expenses, you have those invoices? When you're going above that, they're going to have to show that stuff to you. Then when you go down to 60, how are you generating? Are you going back on this? How are you projecting that within this $70,000 to $60,000 range, there's X number of students?
Ooh, I can't answer that.
So as I said, I did not predict how many more students. This is just with the students we have now.
Yeah.
It would be a $4 million change. This does not include any more students that would be added to this category. And I know it would add more students, but we worked with the numbers we had so we could give some concrete data with what we have. I don't know how many more students it would add.
And see, with the current figures which you have, you don't have that number of students from the 70 to the 60.
No.
Representative Murray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to clarify here too, also, just so that I'm clear. There are other grants that can be pursued if obviously the need is not fully covered by the state, and you're saying that would limit it at $150,000.
160 was the-
60. I'm sorry. Thank you. So the remaining balance of that $500,000 would either be borne to the taxpayers and the district directly, or they would have to seek a grant somewhere else, perhaps through the federal government to cover some costs, or would it solely rests with the district?
With the language of the bill that was proposed, I believe it said you needed to exhaust all other sources. So if they were able to get Medicaid funds to pay for some of these services, they could also use their IDEA grant funds for some of these pieces, but any of that would not be included in the $60,000. So you would get your Medicaid funds, and then you could use IDEA funds, and then you would start to calculate the $60,000 and then go through it that way.
But
so
then
it's-
after that,
Right.
Thank you, Chairman Lett. I think one aspect I'm trying to be mindful of while we're having this conversation is the way in which districts get these monies back, because they are all reimbursed type costs. So if you're saying they would have to exhaust, for example, Medicaid to schools, that's all a reimbursement that is a portion that has going through, as you've heard, multiple steps that the district needs to input, and a lot of hoops or, benchmarks that students need to meet to qualify even for that. So, and then to try to put in this information to also maybe get reimbursed, but you don't really know how much. I'm wondering how a district would even start to think about budgeting, or what to go out to your local taxpayers for when you're doing a budget, or how to predict what your revenues might be, or any of these aspects of this reimbursement method to just be mindful that we're talking about, I think as Becky said earlier, two parallel but very different systems that don't necessarily interface. And now we're asking people to rely on somehow exhausting all these other avenues before the district can even seek reimbursement for the lower level. Not that I think that that is a negative to try to offer more support to districts, but I think the way in which that is timed with the budget cycle would have to be really thoughtful.
And to add to that, that's just more, there is more work at the district level now if you are submitting all this stuff, because now those kids that might be in that 60 to 70,000 window, now they have to be entered into our system in order to get reimbursed. So that's more paperwork, that's more invoicing that you have to review, and you might, I don't know if you need to hire more people at the district level or whatnot, but that's going to be an additional cost as well.
Well, aren't they already entering this in for the 70,000?
They are, but I don't know at the district level how much, how stressed or how, the bandwidth they have to be able to take on X amount extra kids with the current staffing that they have. Because I don't know what that looks like.
I'm not really, I'm not there because the district's already having to deal with these kids.
Right, but
But what we're saying is the state's going to reimburse you for some of those kids,
But you now have to
which are
enter,
not.
but you now have to enter, they're not entering that stuff into the system right now. They're only entering the information and that gets reimbursed.
they're only entering a student if they know that that student is going to reach cap, or they have predict that that student will reach cap. They're not entering other students, or just because they know that they have the time to do the ones that they'll be reimbursed for, but they're not entering all the students in hopes that they will reach cap. If you have a student who's only receiving speech therapy services, you're not going to put their invoices in because you know you're not going to reach cap. So they're only putting in the students that will reach cap. And so what we're saying is we don't know what that number is between 60,000 and the cap now, which is right around 70,000. We don't know how many students that would be and how much of a burden that would be to the districts to take on that additional number. Some districts may be able to take it on. Some districts may say, no, we're already struggling to get this in. We're not able to take that on.
Is that a good rationale for saying, well, we're just going to leave it the way it is and let the districts cough up more money? Hey, Rebecca, or Dick, do you have your hand up too?
Yeah, just to reveal my ignorance, this is a specific proposal in a numbered bill that we're talking about, these allocations, these rules.
This bill, Dick, was put in, Representative Ames was put in for the purpose of this discussion and trying to look at, can we help out districts? There are some that would like to have catastrophic aid kicking in a lot lower down than that, because those,
Yeah.
then we start being able to track these kids and know what we got for costs. But until we do something, get out of the $70,000 figure, the 3.5X, we're never going to know that.
So is this I still don't understand just the status of the proposal.
It's an LSR.
It's an LSR.
Yes.
Aha.
This year.
This year. It's coming
Okay.
at us.
See, that was never said.
And we have some others that are coming at, which are dropping it. The intent was to drop it even further.
Okay, something to look forward
Dwayne,
to.
and then Becky.
I would just say, and I don't want to speak for every district because I certainly don't do that, but I feel like, especially in smaller districts, if there was a high cost cap and then expenses went back to the district, I think for some districts, and I work for one, that have those kind of students that get into 10 times under the new formula, I think that would be hard, I think, for especially the smaller districts, because, I think the intent of the program, and it certainly was in place before I started, but I've been around a while now, that it was to assist with districts being able to cope with really high cost programs. And I think to cap it and then send that back to the district, again, not speaking for everybody, but I think, I certainly lowering the cap, more students being eligible, that sounds really good. But that high back to the district idea, I think, would be really difficult.
if my math was right, I think it increases like a few $1,000,000 for those 54 kids that are over that 160,000 threshold that you get capped at. And I think it comes out to 54 kids and it increases about $6 million to the school districts for those 54.
Becky?
I'm in hearing all of the conversation about the different aspects that everyone wants to be captured somehow so that we can figure out how many kids this is, et cetera. I mean, and what kind of people power it takes to input all of this. I mean, I have worked in a number of districts where I've had a person designated to input things for special ed aid or for Medicaid to schools. It is their entire job for most of the summer when they're trying to get these things in after the end of the school year and cross-reference everything, attendance and all of that. The more that we can either pull this kind of data from things that are already being entered for whatever reason, or the more that we can automate some of these different systems that we all are inputting in. I mean, we've got people putting things into the DOE 25 under certain line items. We have people putting things in under Medicaid to schools. We have people putting things in under special ed aid. We have people inputting things into Nessus. There's all these systems, but none of them are able to, I don't know, pull data to talk to each other to make it less about a person who is literally, I mean, sitting behind stacks and stacks and stacks of invoices, trying to weed through and look at kids' IEPs and match up a certain invoice to a certain service and make sure there's parental consent for that particular service. Now there's some suggestions that that bill is going to potentially move forward where you have to have a consent for every single service. I mean, so now that's going to add a whole nother layer. So whether or not there's a way to sort of get all of this data to talk to each other as opposed to individual people trying to input all of these things across 4, 5, 6 systems might be a way to alleviate some of this concern. You would have the data of who hits the cap if there was a way for some of these things to already be interfacing. It just doesn't seem like that's something that's happening.
Tim?
One of the questions I wanted to pose was, are we these scenarios where it's going to be rolled back to the district because we've reached that 160,000, that particular profile of student, can we identify these are, this is the issue and we lack resources in state for that? I know in my experience, what I'm seeing a lot of with the very high cost is a student that needs to go to a program in Massachusetts. And that's really what we're talking about is NEC, Melmark, those places that are $400,000 a year and up. How could, is there something we could say that would, or promote in a way that says, if we had that resource here in state, it would be far less liability for our districts and for the state, for that matter. And it's something that I've seen in the advocate world that happens regularly. That's where a lot of this money goes, is because there isn't another avenue. There's nowhere here to do it. And couldn't we do that better in New Hampshire? The question I always ask myself is, couldn't we do that better in New Hampshire? Would the student be in that placement for less time if they were in state? And we do see that. And I think my guess would be the other category of those high dollars are probably medically fragile kiddos. And there isn't much more that we can do there. But I think, is there a particular area that could be targeted to help alleviate this?
We did look at Arkansas and we talked to the director of special ed down there. They have no students going outside their state. They take care of everything in state with residential placement. They made that move, and that's why they put what they did in the legislation, part of the reason. Becky, for you, how many kids in this 800 plus students which are receiving catastrophic aid, special education aid, are in residential placements?
I would have to go back and look. We just looked at numbers. I did not look at residential placements. We'd have to go back and
Could you
look.
find that information out for us, please?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
When you spoke with the director, did they have state-run facilities, and that's why they keep their students in state, or do they use all private facilities for those students?
I can't answer that question. That's a good question we should get back to him and ask. There are several people, this one, we had a subcommittee on this topic last year. And Representative Spilsbury, myself, Representative Erf got on the horn and called these people. And they said, we do not send any out of state. Their formula's a little different, though. They also have, within their base cost, resource-type teacher money. Now, when we do that here, though, when you do it on, you're going to still see districts that are small districts getting more by the differentiated aid method we have right now. Because it would go into their base cost in some kind of a ratio, which gives them like 1/8 of a teacher. Yes.
Well, I also think, just to go back to the previous conversation, if you set a cap, for example, at 160,000 for those districts who are paying, for example, a transportation company at a much higher rate than another district, some of those kids are going to hit those caps more quickly. It's not a consistent, the only thing that's consistent is the number. The way in which kids are meeting that number is going to be vastly different, I think, across the state, depending on districts' resources and their ability to program for these students. And it could be geographic, it could just be whether or not you can hire a speech pathologist that year, whether you have to go out for transportation. So I think it would be important to look, if you're going to use other states' examples, as to what are state-run programs, what are flat fees that the state, or rates that the state is setting, what are some of these things that are adding to being able to say 160,000 is 160,000, whether you're in Haverhill or in Salem. I'm not sure that that's the case right now. And I do agree that for some smaller districts, or districts who don't have the economy of scale to provide some of these in-district programs, sometimes it's in a student's best interest to keep them at the district level and create a program in district, but that doesn't mean it's cheaper. It doesn't mean it's less expensive. Sometimes it's more expensive to build that program in your district, but it's better. It's the right thing to do versus sending them, across the state on a bus for 3 hours to go to a program that already exists. These are kids' home communities. They're part of the community. They deserve to be able to be there.
Representative Murray?
Thank you. And I think in I guess piggybacking off of Tim's point, my curiosity was how many districts have more of an in-house program versus contract for third-party services. And I would be curious to see, obviously the question's still out there about whether or not Arkansas has a state-run model, but I would be curious, before we even move in that direction of trying to model something after another state, we're not sure if that's a state-run model or not, like looking at what districts are already doing well here within the state that are a cost savings potentially.
Yes, we do have some districts which do that, as Rebecca says. I'm in one. And I don't know if it's cheaper doing that way, but the kids stay home. The kids are not in a boarding situation. They have family, which counts an awful lot, for a lot. So do we have any idea, could you get that information for us too, Rebecca, as far as how many of these school districts are not sending out to residential placements, that may be providing that service internally? But that's going to be difficult too, because there's some students that have to go out because of
Right.
Need.
Yeah. Yes.
So I could, I'm just trying to think. We could look at how many districts, so we approve all educational environments within public schools and now charter schools. And so if a district has a resource room, it's approved through the department. If they have a self-contained classroom, which would be typically for the students with more needs, we also approve that as well. I could look at the programs that we have, the educational environments we have approved, and see how many school districts have self-contained classrooms. I know there's a few that go through special education aid, but there are some of our bigger districts, and they have lots of students in those programs. but there are other smaller districts that do have self-contained programs and keep those students within district. So I could give you those numbers.
I noticed in my district, I looked up to see if they're receiving special education. For Haverhill, they're not aid. They're doing it internally somehow, but there are aid is going out to some of these submitting to come to the co-op, like Benton or Bath or Piermont.
We have several districts that do that as well. They'll create, in the southern part of the state, they'll create a program within their school district, and then they'll tuition kids in to come, we're going to do a program for students with autism, and they will tuition kids in, and we do see that through special education aid. We're going to tuition them into this school, and we'll pay the fees for those schools. So that school is putting in funding for the kids that they have in the program, but then other districts are putting in for funding for the kids that they send to that program.
Representative Dry?
Thank you. So these are things that are already being done?
Yes.
On a regional basis?
Not on a regional basis. It's by district.
By district?
Yeah.
Okay. Would regional work?
I do know that there are a couple of districts in the Lakes region that are working together on a charter school concept for students with disabilities and trying to pool their resources so that they can send all of the students to that one regional charter school for the services that they need. But by and large, there are not regional programs that I'm aware of.
Follow up. I'm just wondering if, something like that might work, or at least cut down on transportation and perhaps, it doesn't necessarily have to be by counties or anything like that. A region's a region. Right? Okay, thank you.
One of the issues with that whole concept is we have one up in North Country Charter, which all the superintendents got together in the North Country and said, we will put together this particular school, but you're allocated 4 seats. You're allocated 3 seats. And the flux in population that comes along, you don't have room for these, and that's sort of like a career technical education as well. And so it comes down to funding, whether you're going to be able to absorb them or not. But North Country Charter does have a majority of their kids in that charter school which have IEPs.
It comes down to funding, but it also, if you're talking about setting up specialized programs, it comes down to ensuring that that program has the right staffing that is required either in students' IEPs or also under IDEA. You have to have certain licenses and certain people with certain licenses doing certain things. And there's, maximum numbers of students or grade spans, et cetera. So there's a lot of pieces of that. It's not impossible to do. And there are districts that certainly do that. I think in my experience, what we've seen over the last several years is that if a district has an in-district program, it's full with their students that are in their district. There's not a lot of, they don't have the capacity to take on tuition students because they either don't have the staffing, they can't find the staffing, no different than any other, school or district. So I think to just be mindful that creating the program is one thing, keeping it appropriately staffed based on the individual students that you have coming is another piece of that.
Anything else right now? Because we're at our time right here. I think that what we need to do as a group, we need to we're bringing up a lot of different topics here, and it's hard to keep track of everything. But we need to start zeroing down what paths do we want to take here to try to get to our final recommendations here. Yes.
So I guess my question is, and I don't know, you guys are way better at this, like reading bills and what's been passed and things. Is the intent the cost to the state and what the state is sending out in special ed funding through its various things, state special ed aid, the extra money inadequacy, things like that? Or is it a larger discussion about all costs, not just what the state is reimbursing, but what the districts are having to pay, the whole cost of the whole thing, which is a real big discussion? Or is it tailored, I know, with a bunch of different goals, more towards what the state is paying? I guess it can be both, I guess.
We've heard people talk about, Representative Ames and all will talk, and Spilsbury will talk revenue. We have a revenue issue. Others might say, well, why are we expanding in this particular program? We have just as many students in it today as we did 15, 20 years ago, roughly 30,000 plus kids. So that hasn't changed. So, but the population of the whole has gone down significantly, K-12. What is causing that? And is that contributing to our costs? That's an issue that there's even some in your own department there, Rebecca, that are saying maybe it's over identification. But I don't know if it's necessarily driving the whole thing. That, that may be the case in a few places. But I think there's something bigger to where 85% of these costs are borne now by the local taxpayer. That is critical. And how do we take that burden off? It's going to continue. 1 out of every $4 in public education is being spent for special education. That's not the way it was 15 years ago, anywhere near it. And that comes down to our formula. Do we have to change the formula?
I think we need to make the price, at least find a way to get fair and consistent costs for the school districts before we just start throwing money at something.
Well, we need consistency for sure.
Because we can throw money at it all day, but if the costs just keep going up, then we're just going to be throwing more money at it.
Rep. Summary?
I just want to be very careful because the state can't set rates at the DOE. Is that correct for those services? Can we do that?
So there is some language that we've been looking at that does say that we're supposed to set rates on certain things, yes.
Okay. May I clarify? I thought in our previous conversations
We don't currently
you
set
do not
rates.
currently set rates. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
I just wanted to speak to your over-identification piece. That has been a discussion, and one of those pieces is that every district determines their own eligibility determination forms that they use. While there is some criteria to say this child qualifies for this disability based on this, it is not a standardized identification form that we put out from the Bureau that says you should be identifying a student for speech and language based on this criteria. That is determined by each district.
Yeah. Refs and names?
I just wanted to speak to your question about what we're focusing on. Is it the state's cost or is it the big picture? Roughly. Yeah, I got it.
That was well done.
Okay. Well, I was just looking at our mandate from statutory mandate, which is to explore the costs of special education within public schools to school districts based on annual reporting. I think we're looking at the whole cost. And the context is, you've mentioned it many times, costs are going up. That's why people are crying out for relief. And the question comes, who should share those costs? How to apportion them between the state and localities. And that's tough to figure out, and it relates to efficiencies and, whether we can do things better in delivering the service and reorganize a bit to do that. But yeah, we've got the whole shooting match here.
Mr. Chair, would it be also appropriate for us to, one part of this conversation that I think we've kind of threaded through the conversation, but I think it's important not to lose sight of, is the federal component of what we are being paid to the state. So I just want to make sure that we're not losing sight of that as well.
Yeah, we're only what, $50 million IDEA? 50.
56
56.
before we take
We'll give 'em a
our
little
discretion, our administrative fees. It's 56 million.
Yeah.
But about 50 million goes back out to the districts.
Yeah.
I can give you those numbers. I'm just giving you like generalities.
Is that as of now, or
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
is there an expectation that that's on, that's okay
So
going
they've-
forward?
They've flat funded us for the last 2 years, so it has not increased at all. It has been flat funded for the last 2 years.
They've never given us
Yeah.
that 40% they said they would.
Where are we at, like 18%?
I would venture to say we're lower than that. I bet you we're down in the single digits right now. Just the one other concept that I've heard spoken about is taking and throwing some into the base cost, but throwing the large hunk of that $68 million over in the catastrophic aid area. So you're right now, we were 34 million short 16 plus or whatever it was. I don't know what you're projecting for the costs of special education aid, whether it's up going to be 58 million, 59 million. Pardon me?
We're still working on it.
Still working
We're
on it.
very short-staffed, so
Is
we're
it going to
still
be
working on
close to
it.
$60 million?
I wouldn't be comfortable saying, no.
Okay. But at any rate, so we know that that pot doesn't have enough money in it. We know that the differentiated aid is not targeted. And there's some that say, well, people are identifying because they're going to get this extra $2,100. I don't think that's the case. But, is it being used for special ed? I don't know. So there are a lot of different ways to look at this, and I think we got to start exploring some of these paths. Okay, is there anything else good for the order here today? I don't know if we got anywhere, but we've had a healthy discussion here.
Oh, no, I just was gonna ask are you looking for us to send you what we think we should be focusing on, or is that gonna be an in-person discussion?
It's going to be a commission responsibility to develop recommendations and findings based upon our research right here and study.
Right.
And
But I just meant in between, I don't know when our next meeting's scheduled for, but like from between today and that next meeting, do you want opinions about, I think we should move in this direction, or is that gonna be
I think that'd be
in person?
helpful. I think
Okay.
everybody should be doing that. And that way I think it's exactly what we need to do so that we can take them and try to find out, okay, we're seeing different ways of doing this. Let's talk about it. Let's research it. Let's get the data. And that's the hard part. If we can get data to back us up, then we're good.
So what's the question you want us to answer?
Be prepared to bring forward ideas and opinions about what direction the commission should be going.
Yes.
And bring data.
Well, I don't know if you're going to get the data because we've been trying to seek that for years. And our friends there at DOE sitting in front of us and off to my left don't have it.
He's only been here 7 months.
Well, his compatriots there in analytics don't have it either.
Chairman Ladd, if we had thoughts about that question, would you like us to email them directly to you or to the entire commission?
I think you can do both.
Okay.
I think that if you have some ideas, send them out to the group and we may be all able to feed off of that, or send them to myself too, so I can consolidate them so we can have start addressing this and getting people to come in that are maybe expert in that area to give us the why we might be able to or why might not be able to do this. But we need to get going on this. We only have half a year left.
I'll just add quickly, I don't know where it has ended up, but in response to Representative Ames' request at the last meeting, I did try to put together a draft of a chart that shows the placement options in New Hampshire and who is responsible for those. I would caution everyone that I have not had time to go back and cross-check every single RSA that I've referenced in there, so please take that with a grain of salt that I could, with the way that our RSAs and rules are updated and the timing, if some of that column may be partially not completely correct. So I'm not an attorney. I leave that to the attorneys in the room, but sorry.
We have one at the table here, right? Aren't you an attorney?
That's ancient history.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Becky. Can we, get into more of a discussion on this at the next meeting as well? Were you prepared? Okay.
Sure.
So we'll hold this draft matrix over till the next meeting. to
Yeah,
talk.
yeah, we don't have time today.
Okay.
Let's try to determine when we can meet next. December is a hard month. Well, we have session on the 17th.
One day. And that gets worse again. I can't do the 12th.
Yeah. I left my cell phone in the car, so obviously I can't look at my calendar, but if they have some dates, shoot them at me right now.
I am not available on the 12th. Just I chair something else that day.
Is Jane here? When do you have your IEP thing? On the 12th?
Right, 12.
Okay. You might want to mention that to everybody here, what you're doing.
Yeah, our association is having a celebration of 50 years of the IPPA at our member meeting on the afternoon of December 12th.
Yeah.
Where? At the group home.
Good point.
We're celebrating.
Yeah.
50 years.
Celebrate their lack of
No cake, no ice.
It's like that's
Okay, so. Dwayne, I like that. Okay, so 12th's no good. Any other dates which might be good? No?
Oh, we're in session.
That's veto day.
Sorry.
Not coming Christmas Eve, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
16th, okay. 16th?
Yeah, Tuesday. It's a Tuesday. 16th or 19th.
I can tell you right now, there'll probably be caucuses going on.
Well, how about, what about the 19th?
Yeah, but we only meet in the morning. I mean,
Okay, well, the 16th, I'll put it down. The 19th, what's day is the 19th?
Friday.
Okay, I got that down. Fridays are hard, yeah.
I don't know if that week of the 8th as well. I mean, I'm sure you will have,
That's right on top of us.
I know. The 9th or 10th is decent.
I think we need a little bit more time to put stuff together and contact people.
Can I ask that we schedule 2 meetings? Because I know that your schedules and some of our schedules are getting very busy. So can we try to do 2?
We don't know, we really don't.
You won't know it.
See, we don't know because session is, all of a sudden, we're gonna get all these bills and there's gonna be a lot of dates where we have to be,
Get more difficult.
Yeah,
yeah,
and we have
yeah.
a new chairman, so it's like,
Who's your chairman?
Kristen.
Oh, she got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Pardon me?
Vice chair. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
On the,
So we floated December 16th and December 19th as options.
Yeah,
but for the 16th, there is, the House Democrats are having a caucus starting at 3 in the afternoon.
At 3
Which
p.m.
is not a problem.
Yeah.
if We meet in the morning.
Right.
okay. No, okay. So I'll go look at the calendar too and I'll check to make sure with over the general court, make sure nothing else is going on for folks. And then we'll try to set up for either the 16th or the 19th.
Will you send an email out to us?
Oh, yeah, definitely, right off here too.
Yeah.
Is morning obviously morning's gonna be better, seeing on the 16th at 3 o'clock.
But
Yeah.
it would work fine to be at 1 o'clock for that day.
Are you meeting
At
caucusing
3
in this building?
It's Zoom.
Probably a Zoom.
It's, yeah,
The Zoom?
yeah.
Well, you could Zoom from here and participate. If we met like
Simultaneously.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
from 1 to 3, we met and 3 on.
3, it would be fine.
Yeah, okay.
That works no matter.
Or we could meet a little earlier because
1 to 3 would be great because for me, it saves trying to figure out how to handle both a Zoom and a caucus back to back.
So what are you thinking, what time?
it's been suggested 1 to 3 on the 16th. I'm gonna look at other, even maybe if we have to start a little earlier so people can have a lunch or something.
Of course, our 2 senators aren't here, so I don't know what their schedules are also, so it might.
Yeah. Okay. No other dates been submitted here, so I'll look at those and throw out a couple of dates to everybody. Now, what I need to do is get your email addresses.
Oh, right.
Do we have a blank piece of paper around here? There was a large one. Yeah. Before everybody goes, you just put your name down, your email, and your telephone number. And whether a telephone number is a text number, would be great, because, Sal? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're not officially.
Are you working closely with Mark and Brian?
I'm just waiting.
A little bit.
Uh,
Just trying to get through, like, when we finish up with special education aid, like, I'll be.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we need a motion to adjourn,
So moved.
and I'll third it. All those in favor? We're out of here.
So.